Welcome to the non-dual lectionary for Easter Sunday on Year C. Our gospel this Easter Sunday in this year of the Common Lectionary is from John chapter 24. It's actually the first 12 verses, but for Sunday evening, Holy Week just has all sorts of things going on, and the lectionary gives us stuff for all of it. For Sunday evening, it allows for continuing past verse 12. I'm not going to do the whole Sunday evening reading, but I am going to continue down a little bit and then talk about both the first 12 and then something about the last section. So, starting with John chapter 24, verses 1 to 12. But on the first day of the week, at early dawn, they went to the tomb, taking the spices that they had prepared. They found the stone rolled away from the tomb, but then they went in, they did not find the body. While they were perplexed about this, suddenly two men in dazzling clothes stood beside them. The women were terrified and bowed their faces to the ground, but the men said to them, "Why do you look for the living among the dead? He is not here, but is risen. Remember how he told you while he was still in Galilee that the Son of Man must be handed over to the hands of sinners and be crucified and on the third day rise again?" Then they remembered his words, and returning from the tomb, they told all this to the 11 and to all the rest. Now it was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of James, and the other women with them who told this to the apostles. But these words seemed to them an idle tale, and they did not believe them. But Peter got up and ran to the tomb, stooping and looking in. He saw the linen cloths by themselves. Then he went home, amazed at what had happened. And then the extra part I'm going to add on, the walk to Emmaus. Now on that same day, two of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem, and talking with each other about all these things that had happened. While they were talking and discussing, Jesus himself came near and went with them, but their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And he said to them, "What are you discussing with each other while you walk along?" They stood still, looking sad. Then one of them, whose name was Cleopas, answered him, "Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem who does not know the things that have taken place there in these days?" He asked them, "What things?" They replied, "The things about Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and leaders handed him over to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and beside all this, it is now the third day since these things took place. Moreover, some women of our group astounded us. They were at the tomb early this morning, and when they did not find his body there, they came back and told us that they had indeed seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they did not see him." Then he said to them, "Oh, how foolish you are, and how slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have declared. Was it not necessary that the Messiah should suffer these things and then enter into his glory?" Then, beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them the things about himself in all the scriptures. As they came near the village to which they were going, he walked ahead as if he were going on. But they urged him strongly, saying, "Stay with us, because it is almost evening, and the day is now nearly over." So he went in to stay with them. When he was at the table with them, he took bread, blessed and broke it, and gave it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. They said to each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he was talking to us on the road, while he was opening the scriptures to us?" So this first part, the verses 1 through 10, I'm not going to talk too much about this. There's been a lot said about Easter, a lot more than I can add in. But just a couple things specifically, right, about the non-dual, the no-self recognition that I think we can see here still, right? First of all, just generally, the pattern of death and resurrection, right, is part of the spiritual journey, and the move from self as identity to no self um, is felt as a death, and is on the other side is felt as a rebirth, right? Is felt as a new life. I'll just put it that way. Not separate from what came before. And so in that way, resurrection is not so bad a metaphor. um, and I think again, as one of the ways that we can read the Gospels is as mythological telling of the spiritual journey, with Jesus as the source, the example of the myth. It's sitting right here, right? The second thing, in these first 12 is the people who don't themselves understand or recognize that for themselves quite yet, right? They can believe something about Jesus. They can think, something important is happening. They may even have glimpses themselves, but if they're not embodied there themselves, then everything they're still trying to fit it into their normal way of understanding the world, right? As a self who has now died, and then when they come and see that he's not there, um, they just don't understand, right? And when they're told, they have to be told this thing, and it has to be understood in a way of like, a resurrection. He would rise again. So I do think that um, that's one of the ways that we under that you can read these first 12 verses, right? Is just that mythological telling both of Jesus as the mythological telling of someone on that spiritual recognition that call it a journey, um, but at this point of that no self and the resurrection that goes beyond it, and then also what many of us are along the way, right? Where we don't quite get it ourselves, and what that can look like also. And then the second thing I do want to talk about the walk to Emmaus, right? Because I think this is another, I think, really kind of beautiful telling in, and again, in the context of the Hebrew scriptures and the culture and context of the time, trying to understand as best they can, or not just understand, but trying to relate as best they can the experience that they're having. People who don't have a full realization themselves, but realize something is happening here, and probably have some glimpses themselves. Probably have those kind of peak experiences, what I've called experiences, right, from the beginning of not that full realization recognition. And because here, what they've got, and putting aside sort of this is happening from the prophets, that's again, I think, just a way of understanding in line with the Hebrew scriptures, right? But they're talking about, I mean, one way of reading the story of having to walk along Emmaus, in the midst of this death that's happened with them, of somebody very important to them, of somebody that was their spiritual teacher, and that with whom they felt guided and they felt had opened up to those waking up experiences, maybe for a brief moment. Maybe it's not fully embodied yet, but they felt there. And now feeling like it's gone because he was the source of it all, right? And then going along the way, along the journey with somebody that they don't recognize to be him, jumping to the end here, our hearts were burning within us when he was opening the scriptures to us, right? So they're getting that recognition again. They're getting that waking up experience or a taste of it, like a glimmer of it again. And yet it isn't coming from Jesus, or what they don't think of as Jesus, right? Because even when they quote recognize it's Jesus, he vanishes. Which is the vanishing is really beautiful here, right? I mean, not as a supernatural thing, a magical thing that happens, but as um, they thought Jesus, the person, was the source. And I know I've had this. I can say I had this happen for my own self a little bit, but you also see it among people, right? When you're in the spiritual context, that like you found the teacher and they're the source of the waking up experience. Like you need to be around them because that's where it comes from, right? It can be a book, it can be a source, but you're trying to find that experience again. You're trying to hold on to that experience. And then what they get on this walk is just a reopening, but untied to that, which is what needs to happen. It's beautiful. And they recognize it as identical to what they experienced through Jesus. And once they recognize that, though, he vanishes because, again, he's not actually the source, right? The person there is not the source. Um, the no self recognition is the source, right? The true nature is the source, um, because that's what from the beginning is. And so that recognition that Jesus was able to bring to them as a teacher, right, was able to walk them closer to. Um, Now they're experiencing without him as a teacher, and all they can do and understand it as they're writing this down for us to read is that, oh, it's really from him too, right? But it's not from Jesus. It's from it's not from Jesus's self. It's not from his small self, right? It's from Jesus uh, as an embodiment of what is. And now that they can experience what is for themselves without him.